Welcome to the sixth edition of the Privacy Whisperer Live Talks. Today I'm here with Professor Orly Lobel. She's a professor of law at the University of San Diego in California. She's also the director of the Center for Employment and Labor Policy. She wrote three very acclaimed books, Talent Wants to Be Free, You Don't Own Me, and The Equality Machine. The Equality Machine is here. And Professor Lobel has the You Don't Own Me, if you want to show, you also have it. We are going to talk about questions related to these books. And she wrote numerous articles. Her scholarship is extensive. She is trending now with the Barbie movie and Barbie topics. So we are going to talk about that. Why Professor Lobel is trending. And today, as I said, we are going to discuss AI for good, risks, privacy, and regulation. But overall, it's a more, let's say, optimistic approach to AI from what we usually see in the media or the main academic debates and legal debates. Before I talk about the topics, I'm Luiza Jarovsky. I'm the author of the Privacy Whisperer newsletter. I'm the founder of Implement Privacy and a PhD researcher as well. And before also we start, make sure to subscribe to the Privacy Whisperer newsletter if you want to be notified about the next live events, and also to receive my newsletter with the privacy, tech, and AI analysis and resources. So welcome, Professor Lobel. Everybody is excited here to have you. So if you want to say hi to everyone, they were expecting you. Many messages. So today, the main agenda for today. So first, I will tell now for you to have an idea, and also for you to stay until the end because the questions will be at the end. So make sure to have no computer, so just pure pen and paper in your hands to take notes if you have questions. So we'll start with Professor Lobel's personal journey. What in her life made her have this, let's say, unique approach to AI and more optimistic? And although she's also a lawyer, she has a legal background, she thinks more from this, let's say, right side. And then we talk about polarization in the AI field. So what's going on? What's this polarization about? The Equality Machine, so her book here, we're going to discuss some of the topics that are related to privacy and to the AI debate. Also, she has a very interesting article. Everyone should read it, especially if you're a privacy professional. It's called the Law of AI for Good. So she discusses various, I would say, controversial topics. For privacy people, they're controversial, but very informative and interesting. It's important to have different points of view and to debate and to understand. And then we talk about her book, which is super popular now, You Don't Own Me. It was popular in the past, and then with the Barbie movie, it became popular again. And at the end, I will open for questions. So you can write in the chat anything you want in the questions and comments, but we will have live questions at the end. So let's start. So in this book here, which I recommend everybody to read, it's about Equality Machine. For those that didn't get, is AI. So in this book, which we're going to discuss a bit later, Professor Lobel, she talks about her personal journey, how her journey influenced her perspective. And one of the stories she talks about is her experience in the Israeli military. She had, let's say, a feminist experience, but maybe also not so feminist because of the piloting. So I love to hear personal journeys. I think our books and our writings, they are all about the author, right? There is a person, an individual behind it. So I love you to share your story and what made you have this unique point of view, and what's the connection with your personal story?
Great. Well, first of all, thank you, Lisa. You said that I'm trending right now, and the reason really right now that I'm trending is all because of you, because you've been so amazing in this connecting the world of privacy, thinkers, thought leaders, professionals, experts, and I've been following you, and I'm really excited to be part of this community today.
And thank you, but it has nothing to do with me. It's all about you. But I'm happy, but it's all about you, nothing to do with me.
Yeah. No. But you know, Luiza and I had actually the pleasure to meet when the Equality Machine came out at a book event in Israel in person. But it's so amazing to hear about all the people from all around the world that can join us thanks to technology. You know, this is something that has been really amazing, how connected and networked we are, and the kind of global exchanges and collaborations that are coming out of it. And I look forward to kind of continuing the connections on, social media and Twitter and or X or whatever it is, all the platforms that connect that we have all kinds of feelings about, and we can talk about all of that. But as you say, I had a little bit of a unique path, I think, for becoming a law professor and an author and a Californian where I live. I am Israeli. I was born in Israel, and I served in the Israeli Defense Forces, specifically in the Israelis will all know this, the 8200, special unit, military intelligence on cyber and technology. And these were kind of the early days of the internet. And Luiza said, there was this feminist aspect, and then there was the not so feminist because of pilots. So I'll flesh that out. I could not go at that point to combat. I was a feminist very early on, I think, thanks to my parents and the role models that I had around me. But I could not legally go into like flight course to become a fighter pilot. So I ended up marrying a fighter pilot, an F-16 pilot, who is today my co-author, but also clerking on the Israeli Supreme Court, where we gave this very famous decision, the Alice Miller decision, that opened up not only the Air Force, but really all the units that are combat units in the military to people of all genders. So that has been really an evolution. But on my side of the military career at the intelligence, kind of that desk job that uses more your brain than your physicality and physics. But it was a great experience of those early days of the internet and intranet, really, seeing how technology is such a powerful tool. It can be used for good and for bad. That's all the time the message of the equality machine, never denying that we can use technology and these newfound really strong technological capabilities to do harm, but we can also use them for a lot of good and our social values, our normative commitments. And it also had this powerful thing about being the great equalizer, because again, from a gender perspective at that time, being able to do things that we were excluded because of our gender, because of kind of biological differences that were thought to be detrimental to our participation in some places. When it came to digital technology, it was kind of the first gateway of like, look, we can, be as efficient and contributing and participating on kind of that level playing field. There's kind of a third aspect that I think, again, is very important for privacy scholars, where technology was a great equalizer for me at that early time, even from the perspective of having a digital track record and digital paper trail of who contributed to different findings, reports, data mining. I was a data analyst, and I saw all sorts of things, all kinds of patterns, with my small AI here, like algorithm, my brain, that, not the kind of patterns that we can see today using machine learning, but I saw patterns that were really significant for what we were working on. And there were dynamics where it was hard to swallow for some of our commanders in the Army that, somebody who's lower level, a woman, younger, is contributing in that way. But then there was a whole system, and you could see, there was this track record of who was building these connections. And I thought that the valuation of talent became much more accurate when we were collaborating in that way. So that was kind of the early days, and I really wanted my work later on, clerking on the Supreme Court and then coming to the United States as a graduate student and then becoming a researcher, a professor, to really think about all the ways that we can harness digital technology and the newest digital technology as we evolve in ways that are really impactful in a positive way.
Interesting, yeah. So your first experience was equalizing in the gender sense, right? Of I would say more feminism. And I want to bring another topic that you mentioned. Both, I think that the article, the law of AI for good and the equality machine, they are very intertwined, right? They talk a lot with each other. And one of the topics that you bring in both in the book and in the article is the polarization in the AI field. And I think I kind of cover it. Every conversation we get at some point we get into the, sometimes I call the AI hype, sometimes let's say AI debate. But I think let's call this latest AI cycle started last year with ChatGPT, right? So they released it in October, and then there was everyone could see something that researchers and people in the tech area they were already seeing it for maybe a decade, but then suddenly the whole public had access, and then came what I'm calling this latest AI wave, right? So the AI hype wave or AI wave. And something that already exists, and you mentioned in your book is from before before ChatGPT, and there is a polarization, and you name it as the utopians, which would be the developers or the tech people, right? The people, the business people, entrepreneurs, developers, everyone. They want the money, but they are developing technology. They want to solve a problem, but they also want the money. So this would be the utopians. And the other side, there will be the dystopians, which would be legal. I would have to me like legal people, which that we tend to look at the risks, and also privacy people, AI ethics, and AI safety people. So which would those people, professionals and advocates, would look more into the safety issues or bias or ethical or legal issues. So we have these two sides that they were always there, and now in this latest AI wave, and we see in the media and Twitter and LinkedIn, social media or academic debates, it's really those two groups are really clashing. So my first question regarding this, why do you think we're going to talk more about the polarization, but why do you think there's so much polarization? And just a parenthesis, when I compare and when I started writing more about AI and I compare the privacy field with AI field, privacy feels much more friendly community. I don't see internal maybe because everybody goes to a more similar direction of protecting privacy, but I don't see clashes the same way I see in the AI field among the specialists. So why do you think, what's special about AI or this AI field that we have these two world visions and this polarized worldview? What do you think happens, and what's special about this latest AI wave?
Yeah, look, we are facing a seismic change in how we do things, and there is something very scary and natural about being kind of alarmed by uncertainty and by massive change that is coming. And you said, ChatGPT came out in October. The Equality Machine also came out in October, and it was this kind of thing where I was talking already about polarization when I was writing the book, and I saw it become. But on the other hand, I was talking about how people are not really aware of how good AI is becoming. They're just kind of thinking, oh, it's just these algorithms that are all so inaccurate and biased, and they can't replace us. And then there was this big shift where everybody was talking about how good AI in terms of the capability, not AI for good, but how good AI is in relation to solving things, finding new things, making all kinds of decisions and tasks and generating different things that we humans have always been doing. So I think that there's something natural. I actually some of my research has been focused on like how we've always had this tendency throughout history, really, of fearing the unknown and fearing something that will be like in our fantasy the thing that we create, but then will destroy us. That's from the kind of, Terminator fallacy, as I call it in the equality machine, or the law of AI for good. I talk about all these irrational fallacies. We've had this history of thinking, Frankenstein, thinking Golem, thinking all these machines will then, rise up against us. And now we're hearing this all the time. So that's on the side of being very alarmist and kind of the general public. The polarization between the groups that you've talked about, I think it's interesting, and there's something counterintuitive here, where the people who are building these machines, I actually think that they have some interest in making it sound so powerful that we're so scared, but we're also really attracted to it. So there is, with OpenAI, like they're focusing on this kind of Terminator fallacy in the very, very long run, where nobody really has a compelling or a clear story of like how would that happen. But they're saying, we built something so new, and that's actually bringing both the alarmist kind of mindset, but also the largest or fastest, highest deployment and integration, and people joining in the history of digital platforms. Like within a few months, just outperforming all social media and how many people are adopting it. So highest adoption rates. And at the same time, there are those stakeholders that have always been, and this is where I'll say something controversial about privacy, have always been very, very focused on this one value of do not intrude upon intrusion upon seclusion is the tort of privacy. Do not over surveil us. Do not collect our data. It's understandable that this is something that is, again, a game changer when you value privacy. And I want to say at the outset, early on in our conversation, I value privacy. I'm on the board of FPF. I very much have always been concerned about privacy infringements, over monitoring, when we're trying to protect the more vulnerable. We're trying to achieve social goals that are important to us. But I think that I've always had perhaps a more balanced stance about like how it's not the only value that we care about. And I think there's something that is hard with being nuanced and being balanced and being more complex. So polarization is easy. We see this in everything. Like we see this in politics, in elections, in a lot of issues, about, around the world. Everybody can think about their own, landscape of the things that we debate about. So it's easy to point to either just the great potential, or just the one value that you care about and how that is maybe being challenged right now. I think the hard work of constructive visions is to progress with a much more nuanced and rich vision of like how everything is up for grabs and is competing. Like a lot of values are competing with each other when we're building new technologies.
Yeah, and I just want to complement something that you said about the fear, right? So there was ChatGPT and was new, and at the same time there was, I think it was a good marketing strategy of starting to push this AGI, right, artificial general intelligence narrative of you call it the Terminator fallacy, right? So it's going to come, and then there was the case of AI has a soul. Someone was
Right.
with the chat, and no, actually, it feels like it. So all the narratives, and if we think now, not talking about law, but human beings, we love narratives. So there came the movies. That's why we love reading books and going to the movies. So this narrative became big of the Terminator thing. So maybe it's coming. We are building it, and it's coming to take planet Earth. And that's what to talk about the polarizations, because this narrative became suddenly so strong because of marketing, because of ChatGPT, and those all stories of, oh, does it have a soul? People feeling that they have a relationship with the chat or whatever. And I think, like in a dialectics, and then the other side came strong to say, no, stop, and not is not everything how to prompt, and it's not AGI. So at the same time, I also that's why we were talking. I thought about this narrative thing of one side pushing fear and, wow, the monster is coming for all of us, and the other side like, okay, so it's like a reaction as well. So maybe it's also one point. And to continue, you were talking about the balancing. So again, now I want to talk about this book. So The Equality Machine is Professor Lobel's latest book. And why I love the book, I think it's also the title. So most books about AI today, they talk about risk. So even the book is yellow, so it's like the sun, bright equality machine. So something shiny that maybe can bring a light to old problems. And she's very optimistic in her book. And also, Professor Lobel brings a very, I say, a legal type of reasoning. So she says we've not, at least in law school. So I went to law school in Brazil, and we have a civil law system, and we always talk about balancing. So no value, no legal value is absolute. We always have like a balancing. So we enjoy privacy, but maybe we also need fairness or accuracy or other. We are constantly in a life, or if we think with a legal mind, we are constantly balancing. And then she gives Professor Lobel gives many examples of balancing the context of AI. So one of them, for example, sometimes allowing automated decision making can improve transparency and accountability, because when only humans are deciding, sometimes we don't know there are hidden biases or noise and other circumstances that don't allow us to have proper perspective on what's going on. Or another example that she talks about balancing, or we talk about privacy or protected categories, or race, religion, ethnicity, sexuality. And perhaps when we don't focus so much on privacy and we give more visibility, we can find ways to help with fairness and access and other values. So we are sometimes in the AI context, the debate gets too binary, and I love that you bring this. So okay, so it's biased, so it's bad, so we don't use it. But that's not how it works. And you talk about also about it's one of the fallacies of the other article. You say that when we evaluate AI, we usually say, no, there's a bias, so it's bad, so out, we don't like it. And you say, no, maybe we should compare it to how a human would perform. So maybe if we balance, actually, in this situation of the also scarcity, there are other factors to take into consideration. Maybe it's not yes or no, it's in the middle. Maybe we have to improve the system, improve transparency, improve accountability, reduce bias, but we still can use it. We should not deny it as bad. And while I was reading, one of the questions I had in mind, it was, and I think is a typical also legal reasoning, how do we navigate those dilemmas? So I understand that the AI ethics and AI safety, they want they want to help focus on certain goals, which is, so we have to reduce bias, so we have to build safe systems, which is an important goal. But your nuanced view is very interesting. But the challenge, in my point of view, is how to make it work, especially when we are dealing with different stakeholders and companies. How do we promote this type of ideas and the law of AI for good? And how do we make companies comply with this nuanced view? So that's my I think I wanted to hear from you. Like, how do we navigate this more nuanced approach?
Yeah. So, yeah, first of all, what is really important for me, say this to my students who are all researching right now, some aspect of AI, algorithms and content moderation, generative AI and intellectual property, all these questions, privacy. I say, confuse me with facts. I want to have the facts. I don't want to talk in the abstract about like, let's have AI not biased, and let's make sure that we're not infringing upon our human rights with AI. Well, it's so context specific and so capability specific, and so goal specific that we have to be just. It's not just nuance, just really empirical about what we're trying to achieve. So. So the how to is tightly connected to what is it that we are introducing and what are we trying to achieve. I don't like things like the GDPR telling us that we should never introduce any like biometrics and facial recognition technology and bots to sort out hiring, for example, hiring applications, resume parsing, candidates, job applicants, promotion, all of these like in the context of employment. I take actually great pain in the book to show that when you actually do base it on the research, you see that there's huge potential in selecting the right kinds of algorithmic processes, the right kind of automation that will outperform our human decision making, and that's really important to me. That's what you said, Luiza. That it's we shouldn't be expecting when we're approving, and I say we, I do think that there's a role for policymakers to standardize the technology, to create more transparency and require auditing and accountability, and all of these things that we know about. Like, we need to do it in a very systemic way of like what is the automation process that you're introducing? Who are these companies, like third-party providers of these software? What is the data? How was the algorithm trained? We want to know all of these things, and we want to be able to independently like have either government or nonprofit stakeholders do like scraping or double checking the self audits. But very important is that we recognize that we can't expect like technology to solve all our problems, and we also shouldn't require a double standard from automation that we're requiring it to be in some way perfect when the status quo is so imperfect. So this is actually something that I get really kind of animated about, as you might tell. Like, I get very frustrated because I've been teaching employment law and discrimination policy and serving as an expert witness and doing a lot of consulting on these issues of diversity and inclusion in the talent markets and the job markets, and pay, racial and gender pay gaps is something that I've written quite a bit about. And when you're in the weeds of this, that it's so sticky. There's such path dependence of organizations that do not change, even when they're sued for discrimination, even when they say, like, let's change a decision maker, let's, oust a harasser, whatever it is. And we really need to do something different because we all have conscious and unconscious biases. There are systemic failures in our processes. So I'm really looking for opportunities, and I think that there are advances in the AI field of making sure that there's constantly like two algorithms, one that is sorting through information, and then the second one is checking for bias. And the job market is just one example. As in the Equality Machine, I go through a lot of other fields of education and health and government making decisions, financial decisions like mortgages and lending. And in each one of them, what I want to find is how do we have a comparative advantage when we introduce technology that helps us make better decisions. So to your question, how do we make it a reality? Is first of all, we need to have informed discussions about these questions. Confusing us with facts, looking at what is really happening, what is the current capability. So I see a lot of government reports, like here, the Federal Trade Commission, when it looks at like, should we automate some processes? It looks at like algorithms that were introduced 10 years ago that were really not the ones that aren't in the market, that have really corrected for a lot of the fails that were based on partial data, tainted data, not directing the algorithms to do the right, like the better sorting, like telling them to just base on decisions on what has been done before, rather than directing them to be more exploratory and more independent, and do something different in sorting. So a lot of different things that have been, I think, self-corrected in the market are, we don't talk about them enough. And my call, I think, in the research has been for all of us to not just make these statements about good and bad, kind of in the abstract, but actually have skin in the game in being informed, being part of the developing, constructive community, wherever you are, if you're a policymaker or you're a programmer, and really kind of rely on what is possible, not just what happened in the past.
And in terms of regulation and policymaking, let's take, for example, the AI Act. You think this is a balanced approach, or from my point of view, it's not aligned, right? The AI Act is still one-sided from, if we are going to think about your. So how would you change it? Let's say could we twist the AI Act, or if the US is going to have some federal AI legislation or something, what would be better in your point of view, in a regulatory point of perspective?
Yeah, I think the AI Act, and similarly the Biden AI Bill of Rights draft, and then and even if you look at the GDPR, they're very focused on the risks and the fails, and kind of, and I would say it's like the dual risks of bias and inequality, and the risks of surveillance and privacy, and data breaches. Those are the two that are the most dominant in these kind of laws, but they don't give us much direction. So they're just saying, like, in the EU AI draft, the Act, they're saying, well, just kind of decide what is high risk, what is low risk, and then don't use AI when it's high risk, and always make sure that there's a human in the loop, and like all kinds of things that, again, I think inadvertently don't target the problems, the very problems that we want to solve. For me, it would be much more balanced if there was actually a mandate by government to make sure that data collection is done well. So I think you mentioned this already, that I have this idea of data maximization. I know it's controversial, but I don't like that we have as a default always data minimization, which is the term from the EU that has kind of carried over around the world. What I keep saying is that we have to recognize that the less we know, the more inaccuracies we introduce, the less, I think, fairness can be achieved in various contexts. I don't like, for example, like another example of kind of this blunt, one-sided approach, saying that anything that's personal information cannot be collected. I think that that's not realistic these days. I think you've talked about this, Luiza, with others in on your platform, about how These days with AI capabilities, you can't just say, okay, we won't collect identity markers like race, religion, gender, zip code, whatever it is. It's the technology is so powerful that it finds the proxies. So that's on the realistic side. But also on the just normative side, we actually want to know the root causes of exclusions, of harms. We want to see the disparities and understand them. So it actually makes much more sense to me to want to collect as much knowledge as we can, to mandate in these AI acts, public options, so that the data is not concentrated just in the hands of a few, like big 5 tech companies around the world. But we're building publicly these collective, commons of data for our societies. And then we're regulating the misuses, the outputs, the deployment of these technologies, rather than kind of blanket prohibition on some deployment in some context, or some kind of like, don't do any facial recognition, or don't apply AI to hiring and judicial decisions, like policing. Like they're not only unrealistic, but they are actually, I think, really harmful for the very things that we really value, which is making our societies more fair and just and inclusive.
So we now I'm going to jump to this point of data maximization, but just to conclude the regulation part. So in your point of view, we should not restrict collection. So data minimization would be connected to, broad collection, but then in your point of view would be regulation of the use, how they use it after you collect it. So you have this large pool of data that can be shared not only among the big 5, and then we regulate this would be the point of view mostly, not in the collection phase, but the use phase.
Yeah, I think that's a much better solution.
Yeah. So taking on that, so
both from the perspective of market competition, but also just from the perspective of progress in science and human well-being, that we want to know. It's like I have the analogy to our genetic, the genome project, and how much health has come out of that. So it's similar. We can have a law about not discriminating on the basis of our genetics, but we should not have a law about not, scientifically figuring out these things.
It's very similar to Professor Nita Farahani perspective. So she was here, for those who were with the Professor Nita Farahani. She writes about brain privacy, and she talks a lot about regulating data use. Also, I had a similar interchange with her. So I want to contextualize. So Professor
and she's
Lobel,
a good friend of mine. Yeah.
Yeah, people don't know. So maybe they are going to do a surprise live soon. So let's see.
Yeah.
So I will contextualize a little bit for those who didn't read. So first, I think some people already posted here in the chat. Please, if you can someone post for me here the link to a Law of AI for Good, Professor Lobel's article that I'm going to talk about it now. It's available online. So in this article she wrote, it was 2023, right? January you released. I think it's very interesting, and for privacy professionals, and I know there are many people here working with privacy, is very, let's say, even controversial, the things that she says. But I think every debate is important, and we are here to discuss and to understand different perspectives. So she begins talking about, I'm going to talk about the let's say, controversial parts, but she begins talking about the techlash, which is, and she like something, I would say, bias against technology, or bias against automation, or bias against AI. So there are 6 fallacies that in Professor Lobel's point of view are let's say wrong, or we should think them differently. So first is the human-machine double standard. So when we analyze humans, we are more balanced, and we see pros and cons. But when we analyze machines, we want them to be perfect. We don't even compare them to humans. Please correct me if you want to if I say something wrong, please, Professor Lobel?
No, this is absolutely right. This is, and I talked about that just before, but I'll give another example where, like, when are we going to be comfortable with self-driving cars, with autonomous vehicles, robo-taxis? I think we should be comfortable with them immediately when they are safer than humans. But we have this fallacy of, like, no, they have to be accident free, never fail, never do something wrong. And until then, we won't be, like, allowing them on the street. So it's very important to me to kind of have that comparative lens, comparative advantage question all the time in every context.
So this was the first fallacy. The second one, so let's go in the context of, let's say, bias against automation or fallacies, the techlash, would be the approach that AI is static. So as you mentioned, sometimes the FTC was denying AI use in a certain context, but was basing on old algorithms, let's say from 10 years ago or from a few years ago. And algorithms there, or technology is changing and it improves, and we should see it as like potentially getting better with in a few months, and not just look, okay, the one from last year was bad, was not accurate enough, so let's not use it. The third one is I think it's an important one, especially for poverty issues, or is ignoring scarcity. I think you use the example of medicine, right? So there are various AI devices for diagnosis, and we cannot ignore, maybe they are not 100%, but there are places in which it's difficult to hire a doctor, or it would be very difficult to offer health services in remote areas. And maybe if we had a not so perfect AI system, we could send there, it would be much better than having nothing, never having a doctor there, or a diagnosis system there. The fourth one would be
and I'll just say that again, this is about everything, but yeah, like education, for example, again, privacy. Scholars are very worried about introducing technology, robots, social robots, or iPads in classrooms and like in school context. And again, the question is, what is the advantage, and what can be scaled? And particularly thinking, for me, it's very important to think about, like, we can't compare it to, like, the best classroom that has like 10 students and 2 teachers, where there's like all this attention. There's millions of children around the world that don't have access to literacy support, to tutoring, to personal attention, to personalized learning. And I think that there's a hubris in not understanding the kind of question of scalability as part of the ways that we are assessing new technology.
And the fourth fallacy would be risks as always larger than gains. So we have this bias. We don't appreciate the gains or evolution or benefits, and we overlook the risks, focus too much on risks. The fifth fallacy would be thinking in binary. So adopt or ban, and not like a middle term. Maybe we adopt, but with additional transparency tools or safety requirements. So there's like a true binary point of view. And the sixth and last fallacy would be the distributional assumption, which, from what I understood, is the assumption that it will, when AI goes wrong, it will always impact or affect worse the vulnerable. When you say this is right? So it's the opposite. Actually, when we do a right, it will help the ones that are most benefit from it are the vulnerable, or people in poverty, or from a minority that will have more access to better services. So did I say correct?
Yeah. Again, it's like this idea of technology as privileging the better off, or conversely, this idea that privacy always protects the vulnerable. I take a lot of make a lot of effort to show that, sometimes that's right, but a lot of times that's wrong. A lot of times privacy has been a sword for the more powerful. It's been kind of a proxy for secrecy of those who have things to hide, and they are very powerful. And like, I actually some of my other work has been focused, and it connects to my first two books, has been about non-disclosure agreements and how expansive they've been, how much companies are over claiming confidential information and proprietary information as owned, as fenced. And so for me, it's important to say, look, we need to always consider the distributive effects. And a lot of times, actually, technology is the great democratizer, the great equalizer, the great tool to create more access, more scale, as I said. And we really kind of want to. So here's another example where from policing, algorithmic sentencing, there's really this knee-jerk reaction by a lot of like criminal law scholars and activists. They're like, oh, that sounds terrible, that we'll have automation of our law enforcement processes, because it's just going to amplify our racial biases. You know, here in the United States, we have a terrible system that is very systemically discriminatory against people of color, against African Americans. And I think that there's a lot to be said of when, you know, you're introducing, you're taking away the human bias, when you're introducing more rationality into a system, when you are addressing the very problematic thing that is the reality of all governments, that they have very scarce resources and irrationalities and not a lot of staff. When you start addressing these things, you can show how everybody gains, how like you actually have less law enforcement, less you can get, you know, more people released out of prison early, and the ones that will gain the most are the ones that are disproportionately imprisoned. So it's kind of really exactly the opposite of a lot of the stories that we hear about how this will just amplify the current realities of bias and discrimination.
And in this article, the law of AI for good. So after you explained those fallacies that you like, the group of things that compose the techlash, and then you talk about the potential of AI for good, which is very aligned with the equality machine. I see examples in environment, food scarcity, health, accessibility, education, and so on. And then there comes a point where I think it's fascinating for privacy professionals, and I know many people here in the audience are privacy professionals. So Professor Lobel says, after what we've just discussed, there is the techlash and there is the potential. So we have to have a different approach to AI when we analyze and maybe also when we regulate. So she talks about the right to automated decision-making. So it would be the human out of the loop. And we are going to talk more about that. And also the right to data collection or data maximization. For privacy professionals, Professor Lobel is like red light, you know, like big red light. We are like every data minimization basic principle. So I think it's important that we discuss it. So just to give an example, so the right to automated decision making would, from Professor Lobel's perspective, would be actually against Article 22. If you remember, GDPR Article 22 says that we should have the right not to be subject to automated decision making. And she proposes that we should think also about the right in some occasions, and depending on the context, and I want Professor Lobel to talk more about that, we should also have the right to have, in certain cases, right to automated decision making and to have no humans or humans out of the loop. And the second right, so data collection, so and it's very connected to what she was talking about, the reduction in bias or less discrimination. In order to have better data that is useful for more populations, we need to have more data. If that data set is biased or towards a certain population, or it has more data from these people, it will only work for that type of people. So if we have more data collection from more people, we will have more better, more useful and fairer results that will be beneficial to other people. So this, I think it's, and you know it when you publish the article, I saw many privacy professionals commenting on, because, you know, you say data maximization is like red light, something's wrong. So I'd love to hear from you, having in mind that there are so many people here from the privacy community, and we are so used to this like basic principle, data minimization. No, don't collect. Always, it's like essential to minimize the collection. So how would we think together, right? So we have the GDPR, we have the basic privacy principles. It's a part of, is a fundamental right. Privacy as a fundamental right. And also when we talk about AI, you're bringing these new rights. So how do they live together, those two, data minimization and data maximization? How do we draw those lines? I think this is the big challenge, right? Every time we are talking about rights and policy. And also data collection, we said right to automated decision making and right not to be subject to automated decision making. When one is better than the other? How do we have both at the same time?
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. We talked at the very beginning of our conversation about my trajectory of being in the intelligence, the military intelligence, and then also marrying a fighter pilot. And my fighter pilot husband is actually a behavioral economist here at UCSD, and we co-author sometimes, and we talk about this. He flies commercial planes now here in California, and I think that it's a good intuitive example of the right to automation that comes really early on from the world of commercial aviation, where we as a global community have become convinced, because it's true, that there needs to be one computer that really is the central aviation global commercial aviation. Actually, it's based here in LA, and it controls everything. And there is a standardized federal aviation, act law, but international treaties, international agreements, and all over the world, similar laws that at the highest risk, this is kind of exactly the opposite of what the EU AI Act says, at the highest risk moments where there is very bad weather, we know that it's safer to take the human out of the loop and not allow them any control over they actually can't do anything, and it has to be auto landing. So we've reached that moment, and what I want us in the equality machine to be honest about is, when are we reaching those moments in the different contexts that we're racing in automation? And things are changing so fast, as you know, like it's so hard to keep up. It's sometimes like a guacamole game, right? Like you feel like with privacy, I know that this is always true. It's privacy and cybersecurity. Like you have this like new, powerful way to maintain against breaches and, keep information secure, but then there's new ways of hacking, and you're like all the time in this kind of cat and mouse race. So it's very dynamic, but I do think that we have to be honest and align our interests. Like if we want more safety on a given like let's say airport safety, I think it's a democratic question about how do we balance the different things of like having a shared face recognition data bank that is just getting better, and it should be full. This is also related to the data maximization, right? Like if we want it to be effective, we need to feed it, the kind of full and not partial, demographics that we have. And we need to ask, what are the values that we care about? So there's going to be conflicting values. For me, again, as somebody who cares about privacy, but puts it on the same level playing field as other values, I worry when privacy is elevated and privileged in a way that doesn't ask, why do we want privacy? So sometimes there's this idea that privacy is a good in itself, like a deontological value that's just, we want this right to be free of any monitoring, surveillance, of being part of a shared, data bank. I'm less on that camp. I think that privacy is kind of like, for the end, it has a goal of preventing misuses, preventing abuses, preventing harms and exclusions. And so that, again, it goes back to this, like, the right to data maximization and collection, and then let's really recognize that it can be used for good and bad, and then let's regulate. Let's be at the end game, not at the kind of the front, at the beginning, like slow down the evolution of technology.
And on this point, actually, I've been discussing the Privacy Whisperer and in my master classes about privacy and AI. If we think about traditional privacy principles, or let's say the rights that the subject's right to access, data minimization, right to be forgotten. When we think about large language models and the current way that we train AI, that AI models are trained, they are not compatible. How can, and I have been recently various lawsuits arguing that. I saw last week there was another person that said that, well, I asked ChatGPT for my bio and it was wrong. So I sent a request, data subject request, right? I told them delete my data, as the GDPR says that you can have this right of deleting your data, or right to be forgotten, right to access all your data, and right of deletion. And of course, it's impossible, right? So personal data was created from the internet, and it was used to train models, and it's there, it's embedded. They would have to just delete it and do another ChatGPT without this person's information. So traditional privacy rights and privacy principles it's difficult to say that all those new AI models are compliant. So in a sense, I like to hear your perspective. It's a new, and I always say it's impossible. If you look at the way we see the GDPR, the ChatGPT will, or any other large AI-based large language model, will not be compliant. It will not. All those basic principles and rights. It will be very difficult to say that they are effective or they help anyone. And at the same time, there's the aspect of public good, that AI can bring automation and can bring access and etc. So I love your perspective in the sense of bringing a new. I see that privacy, when we put AI and privacy, I see a crisis in privacy, because it doesn't go together, and we need to either we say that is not working anymore, and we need a new privacy law, or we need to rethink privacy. But we need something. We need to keep privacy and keep AI developing anyway. So I love to listen to this article and how you put the concepts. I still have doubts on how to regulate it. I'm always with this regulator mind of, okay, we have the GDPR and the GDPR will stay, and we need something that works with AI. So I love to hear about but it's still hard in my mind to understand. Do you have a perspective? We need and the new AI law should have those principles, and then they would apply together with GDPR. I think it's a challenge. We are almost over our time. I just want to talk a little bit before we go to a few questions, one or two questions. So please prepare questions. I want to talk about Professor Lobel's book, You Don't Owe Me. So it's not related to our main talk, but I want to talk about it in any case. It's about the legal battle between Barbie and Bratz. And it involves intellectual property, but not only intellectual property, right? There are more intricacies. I didn't read this book, but I've heard about it. It became trending because of the Barbie movie, and because of it brought attention to the topic, and perhaps because of AI, also intellectual property came again to trend. So, and also I would like to tell everyone that CBS just bought the rights they're probably, it's not, is it confirmed that, so they are going to produce a TV series based on your book, right? So this is it's uncertain.
They're developing it. Yeah, if there's a writer's strike and a actor's strike in Hollywood, so it's taking time. But yes, CBS has gotten the rights, and they did a press release about it. So that's been going kind of viral about how we will have a mini series based on the book.
So it has to do
Luiza,
with AI,
it's not unreal. Yeah, it's not completely unrelated to. It's actually, I think it's all related. So I mentioned that, my first two books, Talent Wants to Be Free and You Don't Own Me, um, we're all focused on how do we have competitive markets and how does information flow. I mean, again, that two sides of the coin of privacy, secrecy, um, and promoting innovation and progress in art and science. It's all embedded. It's related to intellectual property and competition and the ethics of corporations and kind of market concentration and market dominance. So it tells a full story about how when we had one company, and you could tell the same story. I mean, and it was told like about in the Social Network movie about Facebook and Meta and its history. And you could tell these same stories about Wall Street and, like these financial tycoons that had these failures, maybe like about crypto now and different things. And I wanted to bring this story about corporate ethics and trying to control the innovation, the message, the intellectual property in the toy industry, in this iconic, doll that we have that shaped our childhood, that shaped so much of our culture. I tell the story of how litigation was used in very problematic ways. I said that privacy in the Equality Machine, I show how it is a sword and a shield. And in the You Don't Own Me, I show how litigation and intellectual property is a sword and a shield, that it's, sometimes used to align with the goals that we have in our laws, which is promoting progress in arts and science and promoting innovation. But sometimes it does exactly the opposite. It's really stagnating competition and stagnating the will and the incentives to innovate, to have more consumer products, to change with the times. And so it's kind of and the subtitle is, exposing Barbie's dark side. So it is really about like all these timelines of the darker side of the toy and entertainment industry.
And why? So you think that Barbie movie? So they bought it right after the Barbie movie or before? So it came
Before.
wow. So it was
Yeah.
super, and now the movie also came. So it's all related. Amazing, made it trendy. I see everybody talking about it.
Yeah, I wrote an article this past weekend. It was published on Saturday um, about comparing the movie and the reality of what I've uncovered about Mattel as a corporation and its wars and the history of the brand. Um, but yeah, the book does a lot of that, and yeah, it was. I thought it was always cinematic when I wrote it. Came out a couple of years ago, and CBS optioned it. But as I said, it's been kind of slow in the making, and now it's the summer of Barbie, and it's the summer of Oppenheimer too, I guess, and the summer of generative AI. And so it's been exciting to connect it. Like another connection, I have to say that just it's funny to think about your own like genealogy and motivations to have a voice in a topic. I talk about in You Don't Own Me about how I became an early critic of like dolls and Barbie. My mother is a psychology professor, and I described kind of some of that history. But when I started researching AI and technology and digital technology for the Equality Machine, I actually went into and I go into it later in the book in the Equality Machine into robotics and embodied AI. And again, we could talk for a long time about this aspect as well of like there are cultural differences. Like I asked this question of like why are um, Japan and Korea, why are people seem to be more comfortable with embodied robots and don't seem to have the same kind of oh no, it's the Terminator, they're going to kill us. It's sentient, and so I'm afraid of it. And what. So there's a history there, and there's a kind of cultural. I think there's also generational differences, but it seemed to me that like there were analogies here between like how we relate to inanimate objects, like how much we build things, dolls and robots, and then how we play, how we create, how we progress. So that's kind of in my mind the threads that connect all of it.
I'm happy that there was a connection, and I'm looking forward to watching. I didn't watch Barbie movie yet, so I want to watch the series. But I think the series will take probably years, right? So until we can watch it. But I'm looking forward to read.
Hopefully not years, but yeah, soon.
Thank you so much, Orly, for coming. And once more, I will show, if you didn't read The Equality Machine. Also, You Don't Owe Me, Talent Wants to Be Free, and her article about the law of AI for good. Do you want to share any last message to invite people to follow you, to read your book, to watch anything you want? I give you the last word before we conclude.
Well, it was a pleasure, Luiza, as always, and exactly what you said. I want to connect. I'm very easily, it's very easy to find me. So it's Orly Lobel on all the different platforms that you can think about. So tag me, connect with me, post. I want to hear from readers. I want to continue the conversation because it's really just the beginning.
Thank you so much, Professor Lobel, for joining me. It was a pleasure to have this conversation with you. Thank you, everyone, for being so active in the chat. Thank you for joining this talk, and make sure to subscribe to the Privacy Whisper. And we have another talk on September 20th. We have another one. So bye. Have a great day, everyone.